So with that, let me introduce our first speaker, Josie Quintrell. I've known Josie for many, many years now. She's joining us today from the great state of Maine, and she's the executive director of the IOOS Association, and she'll give us an update on what's happening in and around the Capitol Hill, the Beltway, Washington, D.C., whatever you want to call it. So Josie, welcome. Glad you could be with us today. We'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thanks, Joe. I'm really thrilled to be here, and it's great to see so many old friends and to meet so many new friends. Can you see my screen? Is that working?
Yes.
Okay, great. As Joe said, my name's Josie Quintrell. I'm the executive director of the IOOS Association. And why is this? Oh, there we go. And just a little bit about the association. I know many of you know about it. In fact, we're there when it started about 20 years ago. It was formed by the 11 IOOS regional associations, so GCOOS and your sister organizations, to find common ground, to advocate for the nation's needs for good quality information and data about our ocean, coast, and Great Lakes. So it's a small nonprofit. I'm a full-time executive director, and I get staff support through now through the Consortium of Ocean Leadership and another team that helps with government relationships, ESP advisors, or Emily Petrolia. So what the association does is we advocate both on the Hill, but then also more kind of informally about the work that's happening in the regions, about the work that the program office does, and the 17 federal agencies, building awareness about the importance of this actually sort of amazing system that really weds the federal agencies with the regional interest. We look for common interest amongst all the RAs. Obviously, things manifest itself differently, but there are a lot of shared interests, and we're much stronger together than we are as individual regional associations. And we're work a lot with the administration, work very closely with Carl and Oriana and the others up at the IOOS office, but also throughout NOAA and throughout the 17 federal agencies, trying to build relationships and partnerships. A lot of what we do is with Congress, and I'll get into that in a minute, as well as, it's just so exciting to hear about the regional partners that GCOOS is fostering. We do the same, but at a national level to amplify that. Emerging issues, the ocean is not static, and things are changing fast. And so we work with the regions to try and understand what are those emerging issues and how we can identify it. So the association is a nonprofit organization, and each RA appoints 2 members to my board of directors. And so usually it's the executive director and the board chair. So it's Jorge. Welcome, Jorge. It's great to have you join. And Joe, who's been on for a few years. And of course, Barb has just been an amazing board member, but I'll get into that in more detail later. So while as GCOOS board members know, you just did a 5-year proposal, which is really a lot like doing a 5-year strategic plan, identifying priorities. The association did the same thing. It was a new decade. We wanted to kind of figure out where we're going and what our priorities were. We did it virtually because of COVID. I was a little nervous about that, but it actually worked incredibly well. And I just want to highlight a couple of things. And it's great to have people like Joe and David Martin and Caroline Thorogood, some people who have been with IOOS from the very, very beginning. They really, I think, set the stage for us to be bold. And so our first #1 goal is to increase funding for IOOS by 100%. And so that's kind of my #1 mantra, is thinking about that. And all the other goals kind of fit into achieving that. I want to kind of highlight a couple of other goals for you too. One is increased coordination across the regions and the agencies. We just had our fall meeting. Increase the visibility. We are undertaking a new kind of communication strategy and trying to build that, because we think that building that awareness of how observations are making a difference in everybody's lives is going to help us achieve the number one. And then fourth goal, increase diversity, inclusivity in our partnerships and networks. We are actually working with the IOOS office on a fellow to kind of help all the regions and the IOOS office address that. So this has been was a great process, and it does guide our day-to-day decisions. I don't know, here we go. So appropriations, going right down to the heart of it. This is a major focus of what the association does. And in the last 4 years, we've been doing what's been known as the Fill the Gaps campaign, and it actually started with GCOOS. For a number of years, we'd go to Congress and we'd say, here's the great things we're doing. Here's how it's making a difference to your constituents. And they would nod and say, oh, that's fantastic. But we wouldn't see that translated into dollars that would make a difference on the ground. So 4 years ago, we started a Fill the Gaps campaign. And we actually started off with the radars, where there was a big gap, as Stephen Howden knows, in the Gulf. And that was the first year we actually saw an increase in the regional line. And Congress came back and said, that's great, please fund the radars, but we're also would like to see you fund gliders. That was no problem, since all the RAs do operate gliders. So for the last 4 years, that's been our kind of focus, and we've increased funds for the regions by 8 million. And that was great. This year, as you know, we got a new administration. The president's budget, which usually comes out in February, didn't come out until June. And we had to do our congressional requests beforehand. And one of the things, as successful as the Fill the Gaps campaign was, it wasn't really addressing the need for human capital and the people to kind of do the work, develop the products, do the models. So we this year, put in support for the RA base, continued to fill the gaps, did some requests around harmful algal blooms and the modeling test bed, as well as support for the program office. Much to our delight, in June, the president's budget came out. Carl will go into this in a lot more detail. Let's just say it was much. It was a great surprise. It focused on marine life, coastal modeling, ecosystem moorings, increased the funding for the regional line by 29 million, and included a much needed bump for the IOOS office as well. The House, this was a little out of sync with what Congress was doing. The House increased our funding up to 9 million. That's the mark, with 3 million for harmful algal blooms. And the Senate, that just came out last week, has it up at 6.5 million. So not as high as the president's mark, but that's not surprising. If you look across the board, the president's mark was much higher than what Congress was able to provide others. Still, this puts IOOS in an incredible place, much stronger place than we've been ever before in an annual appropriations. So let me just talk a little bit about, there's a lot happening in appropriations right now, and let me just kind of try and parse it out so you can kind of understand where we are. So in the spring, we worked a lot on getting our infrastructure needs in front of Congress, because we had heard that there was going to be an infrastructure bill. And so there's 2 infrastructure bills that are moving. One is the bipartisan bill, and IOOS is in there for 150 million for coastal ocean and Great Lakes observing systems. And that's the one that has passed the Senate, and it's pending in the House. So that's for kind of more traditional infrastructure you think of, bridges, roads, and in this case, it would be observing infrastructure. The other bill that's making its way through is the budget reconciliation bill, which is more of a soft infrastructure bill. That's the one that the Liberal Democrats are pushing and is in intense negotiations right now. The House has passed their numbers, and there's 500 million for IOOS and shoreline mapping program. The Senate has not. This is the focus of very intense high-level negotiations that are going on right now. I just was on a NAML call, and Joel Witter and his partner Meg Thompson still feel optimistic that these bills might see the light of day, but we really don't know. It's there's a lot of politics happening in it. So those are the two infrastructure bills that are moving. And as I said, the FY appropriations bill usually has to pass by the end of September because the fiscal year starts in October. They obviously didn't make that deadline. So there's what's known as a continuing resolution that will go through December 3rd. So we're hoping that they will actually move on an appropriations bill. And if so, they have until December 3rd to do that. Otherwise, it could be a continuing resolution. So those are the three budget kind of bills that are moving forward. IOOS is in all three as far as we know, but stay tuned to see what happens in the negotiations. So this was just what we sent to Congress, Build Back Bluer. We were looking at filling the gaps and modernizing the observing infrastructure with wherever there was a federal, a national program, we were able to tie it to it. We're calling IOOS the Lighthouse of the 21st century. And I think that kind of is a nice image for people. It kind of built some credibility. So we spent a lot of time in the summer and the fall pushing for this, and hopefully we'll be able to report some good news, because if these bills do pass, it's going to be a game changer for GCOOS and the other IRAs. This is going to give you the ability to modernize, fill gaps, build redundancy. And so fingers crossed that this will happen. So I want to talk about harmful algal blooms. As you know, it's a really important and vital issue in the Gulf, and it's one that is getting traction. And just want to kind of give you a little bit of an overview of what's happened is that it started off with a framework for harmful algal bloom observations that NOAA did with NCOS, the Center for Coastal Ocean Science, and IOOS, where they realized that a lot of the observations that support HAB forecasting are supported through research grants that usually have a short-term lifespan. And so they were looking for trying to understand how we could get some sustained observations to support those. They looked at IOOS with the regional network because HABs vary regionally. And so in FY20, Congress put in $1 million to sort of say, okay, this looks like a great idea. Let's give it a try. And to do a couple of pilot programs. GCOOS was one of 5. And we quickly realized that, you know, the problem with sometimes with pilot programs is you get the money and people do really good things, but they're kind of isolated. And that we really wanted to make sure that if we got this seed money, we could use it to really realize the vision for this HAB observing network. So we pulled together a small team to do an implementation strategy. Cannot thank Barb enough. She was just instrumental to helping to pull that together. And that's kind of laid out the framework for what would actually needed to implement it. In 21, there was 2.5 million for HAB observing, with $1 million going to the Gulf of Mexico, particularly in Alabama, a real interest for Shelby to kind of set up a test case in there. I think those awards should be being announced fairly soon. So they'll stay tuned. There'll be more details. And Congress is continuing their support for HABs in the FY22. The House has it at 3 million, and the Senate wants to make sure it's the same as what was in 21. And so this is just really exciting. Obviously, Congress has some interest in HABs. We see this as sort of a start to bigger issues as well with ecological forecasting. There's a HAB observing group that has started, kind of mirrored after what Bill Lynch is doing with the glider user group, brings together feds and non-feds, doing a webinar series. And once again, Barb has just been so instrumental and helpful and insightful with all her HAB expertise. And this wouldn't have come about without Barb's support. So thank you. And I'm sure there's a lot of you who work closely with Barb on HAB issues in the Gulf. The other thing we've done is to take a look at the coastal climate signal. When the administration came in, climate was one of 4 priorities. And we realized that, you know, IOOS has been out there for 20 years. We've been collecting long-term signals. But really the most important thing that IOOS and the regions have been doing is helping people to address how the shifting climate signals manifest in the different regions. So the impacts vary, region by region. So IOOS is really well positioned to do it. It's looking at sea level rise, HABs, fisheries shifts, marine heat waves. We did a short discussion paper to try and capture that. We realized in that process that IOOS is not alone in the coastal climate realm, that there's a rich ecosystem of agencies involved. So we're starting a climate dialogue series. If this wasn't COVID, we would be having a big workshop. Instead, we're kind of doing a series of virtual dialogues with some programs to understand where the opportunities for collaboration and coordination. Sorry. There we go. As I said earlier, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is also a major priority for the administration. You can't talk to anybody within NOAA or the other agencies without them making sure that this is a high priority. So the RAs and the office have come together to fund a 1-year fellowship. And this is to really amplify the work that's being done, already being done, but to have somebody focus 100% of their time in thinking about how do we share lessons, where are those opportunities, and making recommendations for this. We just completed the first round of interviews. It was so exciting. We have a lot of strong candidates, and we've going to move to the second round in the next week or 2. So we hope to bring on the fellow sometime in early January. And hopefully this will be not only helpful to the network, but to GCOOS as well as you address these issues. As I said, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Communications can never do it enough. How do we develop those key messages? How do we get people to understand that on IFCB does this for HABs and why it's such an important instrument, or what the HAB scopes or whatever it might be? How do we explain these really powerful instruments and activities that people are doing to make a difference in everybody's day-to-day life. And Grant, who is a staff person here, is on the outreach committee. He's just been great. And, it's just been wonderful to work with GCOOS on newsletters and outreach efforts. So finally, we just, I guess it was earlier this month, we had our IOOS fall meeting. We were hoping, like you, to have it in person. We did it virtually. It turned out to be great. We're talking about our next congressional campaign, planning for the infrastructure bills, because if we get that money, it's going to be a lot of work, and a lot of work for the NOAA and the IOOS office to get the money out the door. We had some great presentations from Dr. Spinrad, the NOAA administrator, who actually knows IOOS very intimately. Nicole LaBeouf, who's now the formal NOS assistant administrator, had a really good discussion around marine life. And we're going to be continuing that in a week or two. The new blue economy, this is Dr. Spinrad's, one of his priorities, which is in addition to the really critical, marine commerce and others, this is the data that we can use to support the economy. Carl knows much more about this than I do. And of course, there's a lot of work going around the UN decade for the oceans. And Gerhard, I'm so glad he's here. He was just elected our board chair. And Barb, who has served as my treasurer for the last 4 years, can't thank her enough. Jorge, even as somebody just brand new to the job, is coming in and will be serving on our finance committee, which is a nice way to get to know the organization. So my second to last slide, this is an award that we established a couple of years ago to celebrate vision, coordination, and collaboration in coastal outreach. It's called the CARAD Award, which is a Scottish word meaning caring. The first recipient of this was Rue Morrison, who was the director up here in the Northeast for many years and who unfortunately passed away way too soon. And so last year, the award went to Libby Jewett. I know some of you know her. She's the director of NOAA's Ocean Acidification Program. And we are looking for nominations for this year. So please, if you know of people who would be suitable, this sort of celebrates more like how somebody does things, not just their accomplishments. Please reach out to me. The deadline is mid-December. And finally, I just really want to do a big shout out to Barb. She has just been such an active, engaged person. We would not have the Fill the Gaps campaign without Barb. She and Nadine came to Congress. We had an amazing Gulf of Mexico hearing. It was standing room only. And really that was sort of the starting of the Fill the Gaps campaign. But Barb and I have worked on so many issues throughout the years, and I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you, and best wishes in your, as Landry said, your next career. And so that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions people might have. Back to you, Joe.
Thank you, Josie. Great presentation, very informative, lots of details, and a lot of things, a lot of moving targets. We do have Renee Collini submitted a comment. She said regarding fill the gaps, please don't forget the existing observing infrastructure. Many contributors to GCOOS have been sustaining OBS with grants and willpower. Without sustained OMN, many are one close to losing long-term stations. Something to consider.
Yes, absolutely. And that is why we're kind of taking a second look at Fill the Gaps, because that sustaining, repairing, modernizing the existing infrastructure is so important to all the RAs. And so, yes, point well taken. And it's we realize that IOOS, links and leverage. It's through the passion that a lot of these systems keep going, and we need to remedy that.
Let's see, Nancy Rabelais, are you with us? You have got a comment?
Yeah, like I said, I'm just here to listen. But very often harmful algal blooms end up in oxygen deficiency in the water. So it's a double toxic, low oxygen impact.
Exactly. And I think that's
low oxygen.
Yes, and that's why I think we have to look at it in terms of ecological forecasting, looking at the whole suite of impacts. Can also lead to acidification, yes.
And Kim, you're right. OA is the other part of the triangle.
Okay, we've got Stephen Howden. Would you like to ask your question and make your comment?
Sure. I was wondering if we do get this increased funding, will the IOOS Association support rebalancing the funding of the RAs? Because they were kind of locked into, supporting the ongoing observations and products and services they were supporting when back in 2006. And there were some inequities in what they have received in annual funding.
Yeah, I think some of that has been addressed over the years. I know that
somewhat.
Carl has actually been fairly good about moving forward and addressing that. Yes, it's a issue of concern, and our hope is if we get this funding, it's going to go a long way for all the RAs.
Okay. I guess that's it. If anybody else has a comment or a question, please email or text it to Jen, and Jen will go ahead and get that to Josie or whomever the speaker is at the time. So again, Josie, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Just great having you here.
Thank you.